Hello and welcome to Joko Yo. You may have heard the name Ralph Lane, especially if you were a student of history, American history in particular. If not, here's a brief rundown. It's really kind of important. Ralph Lane was born into privilege that most of us will never know. He was not royal or anything like that, but his mother was an heiress and a cousin of King Henry VIII's last wife, Catherine Parr. She was his wife when he died and witnessed the tumult that took place after he died. She also served as a sort of a mother figure to his two youngest children. Elizabeth and Edward were their names, and Elizabeth and Edward were taken care of by Miss Parr, and I should say Queen Catherine, and overseeing their educations. Not to give you the idea that she just took care of the children, she also married 3 other times, and she was the first woman in English history to have a book of original work published in her own name. That was unheard of. She was an absolute boss, and she was also young Elizabeth I. Well, that was her female role model, and you couldn't pick a much better one. I mean, she's the first woman in English history to have her name as author as opposed to some, man that didn't write it. Well, Ralph Lane's mother was her cousin. When Queen Elizabeth I sees your family as hers, well, that's the privilege I was talking about. As such, Ralph Lane himself was a member of Parliament and later was an officer of the royal household. He served Elizabeth herself enforcing laws and collecting customs duties. He was entrusted to represent the Queen and her interests when there was a rebellion in the north of England near Scotland. He was entrusted to hunt down pirates and was even entrusted to convert some into the Royal Navy for the Queen. I mean, who better to steal gold from Spanish galleons than pirates? As the penalty for piracy was death, Ralph Lane was able, in the Queen's name, to offer a job to the most effective pirates, letting them live in exchange for doing what they were previously convicted for and sentenced to die for. In Richard Nixon's words, it's not a crime if the president does it. Instead of pirates, those lucky few were now called sea dogs, or privateers to make it sound better. Pirates for the Queen, in other words. Men like Francis Drake, pirate, became Sir Francis Drake, Admiral. Drake started off stealing from the crown and ended up being the first Englishman to sail around the world on one of the Queen's ships. And Ralph Lane oversaw this whole adventure for a bit. He also colonized part of Ireland, where it was said that he was a bit rigid, a bit militaristic, and not a small amount egotistical. He also knew a man named Sir Walter Raleigh. And he also knew his half-brother, Richard Grenville, so it would seem to be a natural fit for him to aid in creating a privateer colony, a private colony, so to speak, a pirate colony, to loot Spanish ships when they were taking cargo back to Spain. The colony would need discipline, someone who knew how to manage a colony, conduct war if need be, and who could manage and oversee a team of pirates? Ralph Lane was suited for the job nearly uniquely. So, the area that was chosen for this pirate colony was one in which its smaller ships could hide, but at the same time be able to see the larger Spanish galleons that would be passing by, utilizing the Gulf Stream and taking riches on the way back to Spain. Walter Raleigh, born in an area of England called Hayes Barton, had organized this first English colony. His half-brother Richard Grenville oversaw the journey, and Ralph Lane was going to be its governor. The legendary Lost Colony, although it is more famous, was not the first English attempt at colonization here on Roanoke Island. Lane's was. He did not stay for the settlement that had captured America's imagination for so long, having left back for England with Sir Francis Drake. However, it was under his leadership that England raided and stole from Spanish ships from their pirate island of Roanoke. And it was because of this concerted piracy, governed by Lane, that caused King Philip I or II of Spain to decide to put an end to Queen Elizabeth's piracy by putting an end to her reign by sending an armada to invade England itself. And when the invasion of England by the Spanish Armada failed, Spanish domination of the east coast of North America became impossible and secured English control of the area. So, in one sense, it could be said that if it weren't for Ralph Lane, English colonization would not have happened the way it did, for all of its good and its bad. From that perspective, there would not have been a North Carolina without Ralph Lane. Now, I'm not going to lionize Lane or put him on some pedestal as a founding father kind of figure or anything like that. He was a jerk. According to the records, and responsible, on purpose even, according to the records, he was responsible, and he even knew he was doing it. He's responsible for the death of many of the Native Americans in the region, including Chief Wingina of the Secotan, whose death he was personally responsible for. But still, no Ralph Lane equals no North Carolina. History is the record of things done by people, and people change, making them complicated. That's why heroification, creating people, turning them into heroes, that's not history. Heroification of a person is making that person a legend, and legends are myths. Not completely false mythology, but cloudy mythology. Heroification praises and builds up the good while ignoring the bad, and taking one side without the other presents a person in one dimension. And people are complicated. So making a person a legend is not honoring that person at all. It's shallow, and it's not telling their truth. So in fact, making a person a legend, deifying, heroifying them, tells of your own values, not theirs. Making a person a hero while ignoring their faults and flaws, whether you know it or not, is really about building up your own self, not about the person you're trying to turn into a god. You actually dishonor a person by making them a legend. Stories like Ralph Lane's are bigger than the people that live them, because in every event there are three groups of participants at least: the actor and his or her descendants, and legacy as a result of those actions, the acted upon and their descendants and legacy as a result of the actions, and the observers and their descendants and legacies as a result of the event, and what they did with what they just observed. So you see, like everybody in history, Ralph Lane was just a person, a single complicated person in the events in which we see that he was a participant. And all events cause ripples through time. The bigger the event, the bigger the splash, the bigger the splash, the bigger the ripples. The bigger the ripples, the longer they last. Ralph Lane is at least partially responsible for not only the creation of the colony of Roanoke, but since that colony set into motion the eventual United States, his actions put us here listening to this podcast. And all he did was obey the Queen. He just did his job. The effects of him simply doing his job long outlived his actual doing of the job. The story is bigger than him, and he deserves no hero status any more than a king or a guy pushing a broom down a hallway of a school building, or a teacher, or a truck driver, or a soldier, or a lineman, or a cashier. And conversely, they deserve to be called heroes as much as he does. Add to Lane's legacy his direct instigation of a war that established Native American and English American relationships, the dysfunctional relationship at best that remains to this very day,
And we have ripples, big ripples, in a negative direction. He obeyed one royal, the queen, and murdered a chief, a king of another group. And that's how one man can be built up as a hero by one people and become a demon to others. It's not about him. It's about the ripples of his choices and how they affected everybody that came after. That right there applies to all of us, every single person. For Ralph Lane, his actions were also partially, if not principally, responsible for the success of a distant relative 200 years later. I would argue that if it weren't for the name Ralph Lane, the name of Joel Lane would be remembered by very few, if at all. But as it is, Ralph Lane's choices prompted many to take the choice to heroify him, and as a result, his name, Lane, carried massive clout with those people, putting Joel later on in a position that he would likely not being otherwise. He's going to capitalize on that name. Joel's actions, in turn, shaped North Carolina in other ways, as we will see later down the line. And thanks for listening. Until next time, y'all be good.